Travis, sometimes I've got buyers that are wondering, how does my offer stack up against other offers in a multiple offer situation? I just think it's really important for buyers to understand whether they're in a strong position or in a weaker position. And if they're in a weaker position, how do they improve their offer? Okay, so if you're a seller and in front of you, you've got several offers. Some have seller paid closing costs. Some are government insured loans like FHA or VA or USDA. Some are minimum down conventional loans. Some are large down payment, and maybe one is cash. Can you tell me, if you're a seller, which of these are looking the most attractive to you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if all things are equal, and in other words, if all other terms are equal, and we're talking only about financing, Peter, we're going to look at the cash offer first, right? And the cash offer is going to stand out as being like the best offer when we're talking about financing. And the next best offer then would be a conventional financed offer, usually with a higher down payment, 20% down or more, something like that. I mean, if somebody's putting 50% down compared to 20%, I'm not sure that really sways the bar any. But 20% down conventional would be better than 3% down conventional. And then we kind of look.
I'm going to just interrupt you for 1 second. I think some buyers don't understand the fact that they look at it and say, well, money's money. It's green, green is green, right? But it has to do with the level of complication. So a cash offer, the buyer has the money. There's no problem. They don't have to get approved for it. They just do it. With any financing involved requires some level of complication. The buyer has to be able to be approvable. Okay. I just wanted to make that one note.
Yeah, for sure. And I would add to that, Peter, that that level of complication is dependent on the type of financing, the amount down, and creditworthiness and liquidity, right? So,
yeah.
And that's why conventional would be in practical application better than FHA or some government insured program, and higher down payment conventional is better than a lower down payment conventional for the exact reasons that you're talking about, because the complexities increase as you move further away from it being a straight cash offer. And then you would get to some sort of a government insured or guaranteed loan, like a USDA, FHA, or VA loan would kind of be next. And probably the least desirable, if you're looking strictly at financing, Peter, the least desirable would be, a government-backed program with down payment assistance and asking the seller to pay closing costs. So again, when we're talking right now, we're talking strictly about financing. If all of the things are equal, we would choose the cash. There are ways to overcome that. I think there's other complexities that we can talk about as we get more into competing in a multiple offer situation.
You mentioned seller paid closing costs. So my impression is that sellers, if they've got a competitive offer situation, seller paid costs are one of the first offers they throw out the window. But you're the expert. Tell me if that is true, and also why don't they like that offer?
Yeah, again, it just comes down to the complexities, and usually it has to do with the appraisal. And so, again, it gets really challenging in some instances. If you're putting 20% down, you're asking for seller paid closing costs. You might be able to get an appraisal waiver or something like that. But let's just assume for a second that you've got an offer at $350 that's conventional financing, and then another offer that's conventional financing asking for like $5,000 in seller paid closing costs. And let's assume that the one offer without seller pays is $350 and the other one is $355. So like the net number both is equal at $350, right?
Yep.
And so the complexity is, to your point, the offer for $355 asking for seller paid closing costs of $5,000 has to appraise for $355 for the seller to net $350. And then the other one has to appraise for $350 for the seller to net $350. And so again, it's just practical application of like logic, right? It's easier to appraise for a smaller amount always. That's just a logically true statement. It's always easier to appraise for a lower amount. So if all things were equal, we would just throw away the seller paid closing cost one.
Yeah. And to clarify that point, it's a lower hurdle for the appraiser to overcome in a way if it's a lower price, right? And so sellers need to wait for the appraisal to get done before they know what, so they're taking their house off the market. And in one offer, it has to, the buyer's appraisal has to come in at 355 in your example. In the other offer, it only has to come in at 350. Well, the seller doesn't want to have to worry about the appraisal. So a higher value means if it comes in lower than that, the buyer can actually cancel the transaction, get their earnest money back in many instances, and then, the seller is stuck with their house and they've got to put it back on the market. So seller paid closing costs can really complicate a matter if you're in a multiple offer situation. And I think where you were going at the end there was, we need to figure out, are there ways to solve for that as opposed to seller paid costs?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think broadly speaking, Peter, a seller's going to look at the price they will look at first. And so again, before we said if all other things are equal, but they're going to look at the price first. So let's again use kind of a 350 home as an example. If I have three offers, one offers at 345, one's at 350, and one's at 355, after the seller paid closing costs, the seller is going to prefer the 355 over the 345 before they start looking at the other terms of the purchase agreement. So you're going to look at price, financing, then we're going to look at the contingencies like an inspection contingency, a mortgage contingency, obviously the appraisal. We're addressing the value of the home with a contingency. So do you have a home to sell as a contingency? And so that's kind of like the path that a seller is going to take. Price, financing, and then contingencies, I think, in that order. And so there are ways to overcome some of these things that we're talking about. And I know from your perspective, how might we overcome the seller paid closing costs, for example?
It's not always possible to overcome seller paid closing costs, but I will want to dig in deep with my buyer to say that, hey, ideally, if you can negotiate where the seller contributes towards your closing costs, great. But if you're in a multiple offer situation, let's figure out, is there something else you can do to be able to cover those closing costs instead of trying to build them into the sales price? So that can come in many different areas. One is, a gift from a family member, for example. In some cases, down payment assistance can be involved. But oftentimes that means a higher monthly payment. So it's a trade-off, and it can be a significantly higher down payment and higher interest rate, et cetera, if you're involving that. But if it's the right home for you, you need to know what your option is, right? Other things are a secured loan. And so let's say you need $10,000 and you tell me, well, I can put that on my credit card. And the answer is no, you can't. It has to be a loan that is secured. So you own a car free and clear. You can take out a loan against that. Most commonly, it might be a 401k. If you've got a retirement plan, a lot of those offer a benefit where you can borrow against it. And that can be a way to get past the issue of seller paid closing costs. They're your closing costs. So you're going to pay for them either way. You're either going to pay for them by adding to the sales price, and let's say it's $10,000 a cost. You're either going to add $10,000 to the sales price so that the seller can justify paying your costs for you, or you're going to figure out a way to borrow them separately, or get a gift for them separately. So those are kind of the typical solutions. In some cases, I rattle these off, and the buyer says, "No, I can't get any of those," and then it's like, well, make the best offer you can, but you might also need to continue searching for a home that doesn't have multiple offers, because if you're if you're in a multiple offer situation with seller paid closing costs, it's often very, very difficult to get your offer accepted.
Yeah, I like the way you put that too. It's your costs. We just have to figure out how you pay for them. I love that. We're either adding it onto the price or maybe we're increasing our interest rate or borrowing from a 401k or what have you. I think that's exactly the right language that we should be using. I think it's really common for people to hear the term sellers paid closing costs. And so they just think the seller is paying the cost for me. It's no big deal. But essentially, you're paying more for the home in order to make that happen.